The late afternoon had that golden calmness when shadows stretch long, and the air feels heavy, almost unbothered. Jordan, having just finished feeding cattle, rinsed his hands at the outdoor spigot, the sort of quiet routine that makes farm life satisfying. That stillness shattered when the gravel crunched angrily under several approaching footsteps. Turning, Jordan spotted a determined little parade. Linda Carter, the ever-watchful HOA president, striding toward his gate with what could only be described as the swagger of someone convinced they owned more than they actually did. Behind her shuffled Rick Stone and two maintenance workers, towing along like reluctant sidekicks. But what caught Jordan's attention wasn't their expression. It was the massive, jingling ring of keys Linda carried like a sheriff in some misplaced Wild West drama. "Jordan, we need access for the annual fire lane inspection," Linda declared loudly, practically skipping over any attempt at pleasantries. She waved the key ring like it was an enchanted charm granting her universal power. Her tone was firm, not polite, and certainly not requesting permission. To her mind, this was an order, and Jordan's lockbox was an obstacle standing between her and her version of community safety. Now, Jordan had installed his lockbox himself. It wasn't some community issue panel, but a personal security device marked clearly with signage. Private property. No HOA access without written consent. He changed his combination lock monthly. It was his shield against intrusion, his silent reassurance of ownership. But Linda didn't check the sign. She didn't pause to discuss. She simply pressed forward, clattering keys into the lock like a burglar with too much confidence. Click, click, click. Brass key. Silver key. Skeletal key. Each failed attempt only fueled her aggression. Observers might have mistaken her as someone rescuing hostages from a safe, instead of a woman attacking property that was in no way hers. Jordan, initially trying to stay measured, stepped closer. "Ma'am, that's my personal security system. Those master keys you have are for community access points, not private property." His words were gentle but underscored with unease. Linda, however, didn't so much as pause. She pushed harder, twisting keys and scraping metal against metal, flakes of paint falling from his carefully maintained gate, as if the lock might surrender out of shame. That was the moment Jordan understood. This wasn't just neighborly overreach. It was potential theft of his property rights. He pulled out his phone, thumb poised on record. When someone seems willing to bulldoze fundamentals like ownership and consent, evidence becomes your best ally. His voice, though calm, carried the firmness of someone setting a boundary he didn't intend to yield. "Linda, I deny access to my land. There's no emergency here. Stop tampering with my gate." Her reaction was volcanic. She spun on her heel, eyes blazing, and snapped in a voice so harsh it startled her own crew. "I have authority under HOA emergency protocols. You are obstructing community safety." Her maintenance workers looked anywhere but at her, as if sudden invisibility might save them. Rick shifted his feet nervously, clutching a paint can like a child caught holding a slingshot in front of a broken window. Jordan, who could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, pointed to the clear, unforgiving sign nailed right beside his lockbox: private property. His words were deliberately crisp, almost academic. "Your authority does not extend onto private land without legal easements or court approval. That's a fact." He sounded like a professor reciting lines, but really, he was a homeowner trying to inflict common sense on an unreasonable adversary. Linda wasn't deterred. Her answer? Call the police. She yanked her phone, dialing 911 as if it would crown her the victor by default. To the dispatcher, she breathlessly declared that Jordan was obstructing mandatory fire safety inspections. Meanwhile, Jordan's recording captured the absurdity. A grown woman furious that someone's personal lockbox didn't bow before her jangling collection of mismatched keys. 15 minutes later, squad car lights flickered against the fence. Officers Martinez and Johnson arrived. Linda stormed forward first, waving her keys as though they were law enforcement credentials. "This resident is preventing fire lane inspections," she proclaimed. The officers listened politely but then looked at Jordan, at the private property sign, and at the scarred lockbox now scraped from her attempts. Martinez spoke plainly. "Ma'am, what specific authority do you have for private property access?" Linda sputtered in disbelief, repeating, "I'm the HOA president," as if the title itself came with supernatural jurisdiction. The officers examined Jordan's property documents. Johnson traced survey boundaries with his finger, then looked square into Linda's face. This appears to be private land. HOA jurisdiction does not extend to it without easement rights or court orders. The verdict stung more than any lockbox ever could. Silence hung thick. Her red face drained pale as realization, or stubborn anger settled in. The police treated it as a civil boundary dispute but made something clear. Jordan's property rights stood. Linda's master keys had unlocked exactly nothing, except perhaps embarrassment. That evening, Jordan stared at the scratches scarred onto his gate, marks of a battle not for locks but for principle. It suddenly felt bigger than a personal spat. It was about whether noise and audacity could trample law, and in that standoff the law had, if only temporarily, stood firm. When people are told no, most either accept it or grumble while retreating. Linda, however, was not most people. Having been stopped by police from forcing her master keys into Jordan's lockbox, she didn't reconsider her stance. She doubled down. To her, denial wasn't a final line. It was an obstacle to be circled, undermined, and overcome. And so the story moved from arguments at the gate to acts of intrusion and vandalism in plain daylight. It began innocently. Enough, or at least suspiciously enough, when Jordan noticed Linda's car parked down the road a few days later. He could see her clearly sitting there with Rick in the passenger seat, engine running, eyes on his property. They didn't approach, but they lingered. It was the sort of surveillance that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand upright. People in authority don't usually need to spy. They have channels, documents, and permits. But this wasn't authority anymore. It looked like plotting. Jordan, cautious by nature, trusted his preparation. Hidden in what appeared to be a harmless decorative birdhouse was a tiny, time-lapse camera overlooking the edges of his yard. Installed originally to deter potential theft of farm tools or livestock, the camera would soon become his unanswerable weapon. What had once been a quirky little security project now proved critical, as 3 mornings later that lens recorded something outrageous. At 7:23 a.m., Rick and 2 maintenance crew members strode boldly across Jordan's property line. No attempt at stealth, no acknowledgement of trespass. They carried equipment bags and, most notably, the same spray paint can Rick had been clutching nervously during Linda's first inspection attempt. The audio picked up the metallic rattle of the little ball bearing inside the can as they shook it, getting ready, not for a community project on public land, but for what looked like targeted mischief. Jordan later watched in disbelief as the footage revealed Rick directing his men on the brick patio just feet from his house. They laid out measuring gear as if charting a new city plan. Then one crewman bent low, spraying enormous words across the patio tiles. Fire lane, no parking. Stroke after stroke in flaming orange paint scarred the calm, earthy texture of his bricks. It wasn't graffiti in the sense of messy rebellion. It was official-looking vandalism, calculated to impersonate authority. By the time they left 47 minutes later, the patio resembled a municipal access road rather than a private farm's outdoor retreat. Jordan, shaking, stepped outside with a tape measure after they were gone. He marked carefully where the painted line began and ended. It wasn't even close to the boundary. It was 3 feet inside his property at the shallowest point. The nerve of marking a private patio as if it were a public access road was staggering. And yet, the invasive detail made it worse. Arrows pointing at his side gate painted like wayfinding symbols, guidance lines facing outward to the street, as though to signal entry for vehicles. Not careless vandalism, intentional transformation. They were rewriting geography with spray cans. Proof wasn't in short supply. Jordan had his birdhouse footage, but fate handed him a bonus witness. Emma, his neighbor and an early riser. Her window overlooked his yard, and that very morning she had noticed Rick and his men. Alarmed by how blatantly they were tampering on private land, she had recorded her own phone video. Emma arrived later that morning with the clip on her device. It paired perfectly with Jordan's time-lapse, showing not just the paint but also the moment they crossed the unmistakable oak tree marker that defined the boundary line. 2 camera angles, 1 property survey stake, and crystal-clear trespass. Together, Jordan and Emma documented everything with photos, measurements, and annotations. The word proof barely did justice to what they had assembled. It was an airtight case: trespass, vandalism, and false representation. So he phoned the local non-emergency police line, reporting the incident without embellishment. When Officer Martinez, the same cop from the master key fiasco, arrived, Jordan played the footage. Watching Rick's crew marked fire lane across private brickwork, the officer's face grew grave. His words were blunt. This is vandalism and trespass. Worse, they're trying to misrepresent private property as public fire access. That's not just illegal, it's dangerous if it sticks. Dangerous indeed. Property law is fragile when perception muddles it. If a crew marks a fire lane across a patio, and future inspections or emergency crews take those markings at face value, Jordan's property rights could be undermined. Insurance, access rights, even potential resale value could crumble under the weight of fake painted authority. One can scrub brick for hours, but one can't so easily scrub impressions. That was what frightened him. Linda's war wasn't only against his lockbox, it was against truth itself, trying to create through paint what the law had erased. Officer Martinez took detailed photographs, added Emma's name as corroborating witness, and entered the act into his report as property damage and unauthorized intrusion. In dry legal terms, yes, it was trespass. But the orange fire lane marks blaring across Jordan's patio made it feel like a much larger assault. A rewriting of boundaries, a falsification of authority, a personal violation standing loud and bright in spray-painted letters. That night, Jordan replayed the footage again and again. Every hiss of spray, every casual command from Rick, every trail of orange paint pressed the same nagging thought deeper into his mind. If they were this calm breaking the law, then they truly believed they held the right to do it. And when belief fuels overreach, escalation rarely ends here. After the chaos of keys and spray paint, Jordan realized something crucial. The entire battle hinged on one word: easement. Linda kept repeating it like a magic incantation, claiming the HOA had rights to pass through his land because that's how it was designed. The officers had asked her for proof, and she had none. Only insistence, bluster, and binders filled with half-relevant documents. But the spray paint fiasco shook Jordan enough to admit he couldn't rely only on signs or cameras. Words don't stop stubborn opponents, and even police like Martinez hinted that claims could get murky without paperwork. If he was going to defend his property once and for all, he needed to find the truth buried in the records themselves. And so, one crisp weekday morning, Jordan walked through the doors of the county recorder's office. The building itself seemed tired, a fluorescent hum peeling beige walls, and the faint smell of toner cartridges that had probably been overworked since the 1980s. At the counter sat a clerk with glasses sliding down her nose. Jordan cleared his throat and explained what he was after. "I need any easement records tied to 47 Meadowbrook Lane." The clerk's expression did not change. It was the look of someone who had processed similar panic-filled requests many times before. "Parcel number?" she asked flatly. Once supplied, she began tapping at a terminal that sounded like it was powered by hamsters. While she searched, Jordan filled out a small paper form with neat block letters, hand shaking slightly as excitement and nerves mingled. If Linda was right and there had been a legitimate access lane across his property, then everything could tumble against him. But if he unearthed something else, something official that disproved her narrative, then he would hold in his hands the very document that law, insurance and management couldn't ignore. After a few long minutes, the clerk returned with a stack so thick it looked like it could anchor a ship. "This is the full record since 2015. Easements start on page 15. She slid the heavy folder toward him, its heft both intimidating and encouraging. Jordan carried it reverently to a nearby table, heart pounding as if about to open an exam he hadn't studied for. The first few pages poked at his fears. There it was, a 2016 record mapping a fire lane carved directly across the patch of land that now formed his patio. The language was cold and clinical, stamped by surveyors outlining perpetual emergency access rights. His stomach dropped as he ran his finger along the margin. This was the smoking gun Linda must have been clinging to. At first glance, it explained her confidence, but fate granted impatience and Jordan kept flipping. 23 pages in, something glimmered like treasure among cobwebs. A document titled, As-Built Revision AB 208-47. Across the top corner, crisp and undeniable, was the county engineer's official seal. The drawing showed a repositioned fire lane, rerouted entirely off his property and shifted to the community's outer edge. And then came the words that made him whisper aloud, "Oh my God." Said easement rights are hereby extinguished and removed from the subject property effective upon recording. Clear. Final. Legal. Those so-called emergency rights Linda had been citing were not sleeping, not dormant, they were gone. Terminated in 2018, permanently vacated. No ambiguity, no loophole, signed by the county engineer fire marshal, and stamped like holy script from the very officials tasked with fire safety and engineering governance. Jordan reread that single paragraph perhaps 10 times, letting the meaning soak into his bones. He hadn't just stumbled onto clarification. He had discovered dynamite. Linda's entire foundation crumbled in black and white proof stamped with government seals. Her master keys, her threats, her painted vandalism, all of them now stood opposite cold certainty. The HOA's authority on his land had been legally erased 6 years earlier. The clerk was used to emotionless customers, but she raised an eyebrow when Jordan asked for multiple certified copies. "This is standard procedure when developments adjust access routes," she explained while sliding the sheets into the copier. "Old easements get vacated so no one can confuse rights longer in effect." Jordan almost laughed at the irony, though giddiness rattled through his chest. No confusion about property rights. If only Linda had checked before brandishing paint and keys like a self-anointed marshal. Back home, he spread the documents across his kitchen table, the ink and stamps glinting in sunlight that fell through the windows. He snapped photos of every page, emailed digital backups to his lawyer friend, and stared at the crucial line that would become his shield. For so long, he had been responding defensively, recording rants, photographing paint, correcting false claims. But with this discovery, the story shifted. He was no longer defending against her endless aggression. He was holding the one document that made her entire crusade legally baseless. The deeper realization stung almost as much as the original trespass. Linda might not have been lying outright. Her binder of authority could easily have held the old 2016 document without awareness of the 2018 termination. But ignorance didn't excuse brute force or vandalism. If she had done her due diligence, she would have discovered what he now held tightly in his hands. Proof that the very lane she was painting back into existence had been legally vacated years before. That night, Jordan sat alone on his once defaced patio, staring at the garish orange letters still seared across his bricks. They suddenly looked pathetic, a performative gesture vaporized by one stamped file at the county's office. The irony was bitter and sweet all at once. While Linda had tried to create authority with spray paint and screaming, Jordan needed only a single government record to shatter her case. By the time Jordan finished studying the county's vacation documents, the tide had shifted. For weeks it had seemed Linda held the upper hand through sheer audacity, appearing with her master keys, shrieking about safety, spray painting bold authority across his bricks. But paper, real, stamped, verifiable county paper, was more powerful than all her theatrics. And Jordan knew. The time had come not just to defend, but to confront. The opportunity arrived in the form of a scheduled conference call. Pinnacle Property Management, led by Regional Supervisor David Morrison, wanted the issue settled. Rebecca Thompson, the underwriter from Atlantic Insurance, would attend remotely, while Linda, undaunted, would be there in person. To Jordan, it felt like walking into a courtroom armed with the truth. He wasn't simply a homeowner under siege anymore. He was carrying a proof text engraved with signatures that no HOA president could overrule. Jordan set his dining room like a war table. Documents arranged in meticulous order. The county's 2018 easement vacation front and center, followed by the spray paint photos and Emma's corroborating video screenshots. Even Officer Martinez's police report had its section, a neat tab labeled Incidents. By the time Linda arrived, portfolio tucked under her arm like a weapon, Jordan was steady, not immune to nerves, but grounded in confidence. "Jordan," she began with the clipped tone of someone still convinced she was in control, "we need to settle this properly. You cannot obstruct inspections without risking insurance loss." Jordan merely gestured at the seat opposite him. "Exactly why we're clarifying things today." His voice was calm, though his heart thudded like hooves against soil. At precisely 2 p.m., Rebecca Thompson appeared on screen. Professional, composed, and clearly practiced at mediating disputes that made insurance seem like trial law. Good afternoon. I'm told this meeting is about emergency access rights and compliance requirements. Let's proceed. Linda leapt in first, unrolling her arguments like a speech she'd practiced in the mirror. She cited historical easement rights, the alleged necessity of annual vegetation clearance, the importance of insurers recognizing HOA authority. She even waived copies of documents, 2016 surveys, and old safety protocols as her exhibit, A Listening. Jordan almost pitied her. Almost. Because in her binder of outdated law, she clearly believed she'd built an airtight case. Rebecca listened politely, but her questions cut sharper than scalpels. Do you have current legal documentation of active easement rights granting access over Mr. Blake's land? She asked. Our compliance requirements must rest upon verified recorded authority. Silence. Linda fumbled. She repeated historical access routes, raised her voice, shifted papers frantically, but she had no current anything. It was smoke masquerading as structure. Jordan seized the moment. Clearing his throat, he shared his screen. The vacated easement, stamped 2018, highlighted precisely where the county declared the fire lane terminated and relocated. The engineer's seal, the fire marshal's signature, the phrase extinguished and removed glowing on the page. On the video window, Rebecca leaned forward, scribbling notes. This appears legitimate. County recorded, properly stamped. If access rights were vacated and recorded in 2018, then no insurance compliance can be based on the prior easement. Linda's face drained. Her prepared expression dissolved into disbelief, like a student realizing she'd studied the wrong textbook for the exam. Then desperation surged into anger. She slammed her palm on the table. Community safety doesn't disappear just because of bureaucratic paperwork. You cannot erase fire lane requirements with a stamp. Her voice cracked slightly, straining under the weight of denial. But Rebecca, blunt in her professionalism, didn't waver. Ma'am, insurance underwriting cannot support activities that violate property law. Without current easements or court orders, forced entry is trespass. Vandalism dressed as inspection cannot be condoned. That word trespass seemed to hang in the air like a judgment bell, and Jordan wasn't done. He scrolled to the next piece. Photographs of the neon red spray paint across his bricks. Emma's video clip capturing the crew stepping across the oak boundary into his property. These markings were made after I explicitly denied access, Jordan explained calmly. They altered my physical property as if it were public space. There was no legal authority, only assumption. Rebecca pressed her lips together, but her notes grew longer. Thus, she concluded, what we're looking at is not compliance reinforcement, but unauthorized damage presented as authority. Linda broke again, pacing Jordan's dining room, words spilling out in half-formed fury. Fire safety is never optional. You'll regret undermining this when someone dies in an emergency. Her voice faltered, not because her passion waned, but because all present, insurance, property management, and Jordan, saw her argument had no legal anchor. The outcome was decisive, though dressed in professional phrasing. Rebecca stated that Atlantic would issue a letter to the HOA. All claims of access through Jordan's property were invalid. Insurance coverage could not support attempts exceeding documented authority, and damages resulting from Linda's trespass could trigger liability for the board. David Morrison, representing Pinnacle, inserted a grave reminder. Mrs. Carter, exceeding HOA authority not only creates civil liability but may constitute misconduct under our own governance. He spoke like someone who had seen implosions before and recognized another incoming. When the meeting concluded, Linda bolted. She slammed her leather portfolio shut, muttered accusations about bureaucracy destroying safety, and stormed out. Through the window, Jordan watched her car peel away, rattled but unwilling to admit defeat out loud. Meanwhile, Rebecca's closing words resounded like balm. Mr. Blake, the law and your documents stand. Loud claims don't override recorded authority. As quiet resettled over the farmhouse, Jordan realized that for the first time, Linda's empire of bluster had cracked before witnesses who mattered. Her keys couldn't open his locks. Her paint couldn't rewrite land, and now her words couldn't fool insurers. Step by step, the chaos was becoming truth on paper. The storm Linda had whipped up finally hit the highest walls it could, the HOA board itself. For weeks, Jordan had been gathering evidence like a farmer stockpiles bales, footage, deeds, police reports, insurance letters. By now his binder of proof weighed enough to bruise a table, and with citations still hanging around Linda's neck, pressure mounting from Pinnacle Property Management, and the insurance underwriter breathing down the HOA's neck, the showdown had outgrown backgates and lockboxes. It was now community-wide. The entire neighborhood would watch as authority, pride, and reality collided. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the community center. Jordan, who had never cared for HOA meetings before, found himself arriving early, armed with his binder and flanked by Emma, who insisted on coming along for support. He was surprised to see the number of residents already gathered, whispers carried around the room like restless bees. Everyone had heard rumors of Linda's key-waving antics and paint-splattered misadventures, though few knew the whole sprawling story. Tonight they would. At the head table sat Linda, shoulders visibly tense, her trademark leather portfolio opened in front of her like a badge of authority, or perhaps this time as a shield. Her mouth was set firm, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion from weeks of resistance. Next to her sat the 3 other board members, all looking as though they'd rather be anywhere else. David Morrison from Pinnacle presided, crisp in his suit, alongside a laptop broadcasting Rebecca Thompson, the insurance underwriter, whose face radiated the quiet gravitas of someone who'd already checked the paperwork and knew how this was going to end. David opened formally, his voice a steady gavel cutting through the murmurs. This meeting has been called to address urgent liability and leadership matters. Evidence collection has concluded. Insurance coverage is now endangered due to misrepresentation of access rights. Tonight decisions must be made, whispers rippled. Rebecca took the floor remotely, summarizing her findings. Atlantic Insurance has verified that emergency easement rights across Mr. Blake's property were vacated and legally terminated in 2018. Any claims based on that access are invalid. Accordingly, coverage will remain suspended until all false assertions cease and property damage is repaired. That was the first audible gasp from the audience, a collective awareness that Linda's claims hadn't just been wrong, but had now put the entire community at risk of losing coverage. Insurance, after all, is the lifeblood of suburban comfort. Few neighbors may care about property law, but everyone cares about premiums skyrocketing. Heads turned toward Linda at once, their patience beginning to crack. Officer Chen, present through video conference, then gave her report on citations. Linda had trespassed, tampered with private property, and acted under rights that no longer existed. Her term bureaucratic technicalities couldn't erase county code. The board attorney, Martin Reeves, outlined the legal exposure bluntly. Continued efforts to assert invalid easement rights may invite civil liability for the board personally. Misrepresentation could expose members to lawsuits. The HOA cannot enforce powers it no longer possesses. His professional words landed like bricks. At last, the spotlight turned directly onto Linda. Morrison allowed her response, and for a moment the room hung expectant. She stood, voice trembling with the ferocity of someone both cornered and unwilling to yield. Her defense was less speech than a plea. Community safety cannot vanish with one stamped document. Bureaucracy doesn't extinguish moral duty. Fire lanes must exist. If paperwork contradicts safety, then paperwork is wrong. Her words were passionate, but passion couldn't erase signatures and printing dates. The board members traded glances, discomfort etched across their faces. Patricia Williams, a longtime board member with a calm teacher's demeanor, broke the silence. Linda, the county engineer, didn't create a technicality. They documented reality. The access route changed years ago. We cannot pretend otherwise. That was the moment the dam broke. James Mitchell, another board member, moved for a formal vote of no confidence in Linda Carter as president of the HOA. Patricia immediately seconded it. David Morrison reminded the room of the stakes. Suspended insurance, property damages, repeated trespass, escalating risk. Then came the vote, 4 in favor, 1 abstaining. Unanimous removal. Linda's face shifted through stages. A flash of anger, a sliver of denial, then raw betrayal. Finally, resignation. Her voice cracked with bitterness as she muttered, "You're abandoning community safety for convenience. When fire trucks can't reach a house, remember this decision." With that, she shoved her papers aside, shut her portfolio, and sat stiffly, no longer speaking as a president but as a wounded neighbor. Immediately, Patricia Williams was appointed interim president. Her first act was practical and merciful, authorizing funds to restore Jordan's patio, removing the garish spray paint that still screamed "fire lane" across his bricks. The HOA also approved reimbursing Jordan's expenses, covering both restoration and the legal documentation he'd needed to defend himself. More importantly, the board signed a formal apology, acknowledging in writing that no emergency access rights remained on his property. Rebecca concluded with final conditions. Atlantic Insurance required firm new procedures. Any future HOA action involving property rights would need verification with county documents, mandatory training in easement law, and consultation with legal authorities. The implication was clear: no more self-invented authority, no more master key crusades. That night, as neighbors filed out, some relieved, others tired of the spectacle, Jordan lingered in the dimming community hall. Emma patted his shoulder with a smile. "You didn't just protect your farm, you reminded all of us where authority actually comes from." Hours later, Jordan stood on his now silent patio. The spray paint would soon be gone, but for now its bright scars glowed under the porch light, a reminder of how fragile boundaries can feel when challenged by loud voices. And yet, resting on his kitchen table inside were the county records, clean and undeniable, the true key that unlocked the end of Linda's crusade. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had shaken a ring of master keys like they were power incarnate. Yet the only thing that ever mattered was one stamped document in an old government file. Jordan took a deep breath. Maybe the greatest lesson wasn't about locks, lanes, or even law. It was about noise versus truth. Loud claims might scrape some paint and stir unwanted drama, but authority, real authority, lives only where it is written, signed, and real.